Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at an Austrian Pinot Noir from a producer called Weingut Brundlmayer. This is their 2019 vintage of that. And they do also make a reserve Pinot Noir, but this is just the ordinary bottling. Now, Brundlmayer are a historic and highly respected Austrian wine. They trace their establishment back to 1581. And the estate owns 80 hectares of vines in the Kamptal region. And they're based in Langenlois, which is about 70 kilometres northeast of Vienna. And it's here that the Kamp Valley, a tributary of the Danube, joins the Danube. So you have the rivers modifying the climate, and you have some really good vineyard sites. A number of the vineyards in which Brundlmayer have vines, for instance, Heiligenstein and Riesling, are Ersterlanger, so classified as first growths in the Austrian wine classification system. Now, Brundlmayer don't necessarily own these vineyards outright. I mean, for instance, their historic vines on the Heiligenstein, I think they own something like 11 hectares out of the 36 hectares of the entire site. So these are vineyards with multiple owners. The estate is currently owned and run by Willy Brundlmayer, who took over its running in 1980. In 1980, quite a difficult time for the Austrian wine industry. They just had the problems of the adulteration scandal, and it was very difficult to sell Austrian wine. So in the intervening period, wineries such as this had to rebuild the reputation of Austrian wine around the world, and they've done an incredibly good job of it. Since Willy has been running the estate, they've converted to being organic. Their approach is entirely sustainable, and their viticulture is as ecologically friendly as they can make it. Now, Brundlmayer are probably most famous for their white, and these are produced under the Kamptal DAC. However, 30% of Brundlmayer's production is actually red, so this is quite important to them. Now, these wines are simply labelled as Niederosterreich because the Kamptal DAC doesn't cover any of the red grape varieties. So, for instance, this is a wine that comes from two vineyards, Deschamps and Kieferberg. Now, Kieferberg is an Ersterlanger. So the Grüner Veltliner, for which this vineyard is really quite well known, is labelled as an Erstesgewachs, whereas this is not entitled to use the name of the vineyard or the vineyard designation. It simply becomes a Niederosterreich wine. So these two vineyards they're neighbours. They sit on the hillside to the north of Langenlois, above the town. And Deschamps is terraced, it goes up the hillsides. You'll find that is predominantly southeast facing calcareous loess soil, although higher up the terraces become more clayey and there is some gravel as well. And that's much closer to the style of the soils in Kieferberg, where you get calcareous soils which have clay and also have sort of marine fossils in them. And these soils sit over layers of sand, gravel, and crystalline bedrock of gneiss, mica schist, or something called amphibolite. The producer's notes state that you have to be very careful with selection for these wines. They'll pick only the ripest grapes to go into this wine. If the weather is bad, selection of the best fruit is essential. They describe vinification as being traditional. They don't really reference what those traditions are, so whether this is punched down or whether this is pumped over for extraction, I really don't know. They don't tell us if the wine's been destemmed or not, but they do say that maceration lasts about a week, and after that the wine is run off into barrel for 18 months. The barrels they use are 300 litres in size, they're 2 and 3 years old, and they're a combination of French and Austrian oak, the Austrian oak being from the Marharzburg forest, which is nearby, both of which will be sessile oaks, so the actual flavours contributed by the two oaks should be fairly similar. The elevation of the vineyard sits at between 260 and 340 metres above sea level, giving relatively cool conditions, and I think we're going to see that in the style of the wine. Harvest took place on 3 days in September 2019, so that was the 13th, the 18th and the 19th of September. And the wine came to be bottled in January of 2022. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? First of all, looking at it, the ruby red colour seems to have a fairly dark ruby pigmentation, and yet it's not particularly deep at all. I mean, you'd almost say that was pale. Also, I think it's fair to say that the colour is starting to fade slightly at the rim. It's almost a sort of the first hints of brick red there. Swirling the wine, and I've got this in a nice big glass in the hope of showing its aromas. The wine only has 12.5% alcohol, which I think is down to that sort of cool climate growing conditions. But it is producing some fairly reasonably sized tears on the edge of the glass there as I swirl it. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas do have some delicate, high-toned, soft red fruit, maybe spicy raspberry, that sort of note. But really, what's most to the fore is a slightly meaty, quite savoury, spicy, almost sort of forest floor developed notes. They really are quite sort of high-toned and heading towards more mature notes. There are some spices there, it's cinnamon, nutmeg, assuming that's coming from the oak. And I think they're allowed to come through because the weight of the fruit seems quite light on the nose. So let's have a taste, shall we? The wine is dry, it has a very fresh acidity. And where that acidity is making me salivate on the edges of my tongue, that's where I'm tasting cedary notes, nutmeg notes, vanilla touches. There really is quite a pungent vanilla note coming through, coming actually on the tip of my tongue just at the moment, with those spices behind it. The mid-palate sort of seems to have dried out, got a little bit of texture, but this is not a hugely structured wine, with quite delicate tannins. But the mid-palate is sort of quite dried and savoury. There's sort of tobacco leaf notes perhaps, maybe slight hints of meatiness, but certainly these are quite developed aromas. I did read somebody's tasting note where they suggested that these are quite cerebral wines. They're not opulent and giving immediate fruity pleasure. I'm trying to think of something I would compare them to with Burgundy. They have the freshness and the brightness of reds from Chardonnay or Chassagne or Rachet, but at the same time, they don't have the intensity of bright summer fruit those wines would develop, instead of which it's showing these spices, these developed notes, this meatiness. I think it would be great fun to be pairing this wine with rich dishes with lovely full sort of gamey flavours, mushroom flavours, those sort of quite meaty notes. I think there's an awful lot you'd find that would match up in that. I think the wine seems to have quite nice length. I mean, certainly the alcohol at 12.5% is not intruding on the back palate. It's certainly not overpowering the fruit. And the freshness of the acidity is giving good length to those really quite delicate red fruit perfumes that linger just with delicacy right at the end of the wine. Now, looking at the Wine Searcher aggregated score for this vintage of this wine, it scores very well. It scores a 93. I do think it's a challenging wine to taste. I think it's something you need to think about a little. But as it's resolving on the palate, although it's not intense on the mid-palate, there really is a persistence, and there are lovely, just complex flavours just keep opening up. I'm slightly surprised to say it, but I do think 93 out of 100 is a very fair score for this wine. Not only is it decent, well made and well balanced, it really has some character, it certainly has some individuality, and its intensity actually becomes very endearing. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed watching the tasting. If you have, please press the like button. We'd very much appreciate that. If you'd like to watch more of our videos, do please subscribe to our channel. It would be fantastic to have your support. Any comments you have, please leave those in the comments box below. We would genuinely love to hear your feedback on the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. I'll leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher find page for this wine so that you can find out where it's available, what its pricing is. You can perhaps review the critics' notes on it. You can see what additional detail we have in the winemaking and things like that. And you can also see its price history. So hopefully you'll find something to interest you there. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the tasting, do please feel free to forward them the video. We'd really love your endorsement for that. Most importantly though, do please try and make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.